I'd like to invite our keynote speaker onto the stage right now, and we will kick things off and get things started. And I'm already seeing an amazing amount of engagement in the chat, which is awesome. So thank you all for doing that. And I'd like to say that just quickly a little PSA, public service announcement. Originally, the keynote speaker for today was going to be David Cohen, who is a co-founder, board member, and former CEO of Techstars. David had an emergency, so and not to get into specifics, but it's a very legitimate and serious emergency. But we could not ask for any better of a replacement. I mean, literally, we have another David. And I say that not not that it's a lesser David, right? Another David, another founder of Techstars, another board member of Techstars, and another former CEO of Techstars, David Brown. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Jonathan. You know, David Cohen and I have been friends and co-founders for almost 35 years now. So we're basically interchangeable at this point.
Yeah. As you mentioned, we have the same shtick.
We have the same shtick, exactly.
Right. So David, just quickly to get into a little bit about your background. So you were the Techstars CEO, co-CEO for about 7 years or so, right? And I know you guys brought in a new CEO last year. That's correct.
Yep, that's exactly right. David and I, along with Brad Feld and Jared Polis, founded Techstars. Gosh, I think it's almost 15 years ago now. And I stepped down as CEO about a year ago. We brought in Maël Gave, who's fantastic in running the business. And David and I remain on the board, but don't have operational roles.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear, just as the co-founders of Techstars, I think what a lot of entrepreneurs don't get is that accelerators and even funds, right, are sort of startups in the beginning. Right. So I'd love to just kind of hear where the inception point of Techstars and how it gets started, just kind of that typical startup story that I think a lot of people won't attribute to an organization like Techstars that at this point now is so big and ubiquitous and has done amazing things.
You know, I spoke actually at my daughter's middle school years ago, and she had a teacher that wanted to teach students about how to create a business. And I asked the students how many of them thought that the big companies that they knew of, that they had heard of, were startup once, right? What percentage? And it was funny to hear them, say very few or none or half or whatever. And of course, every company was a startup once, right? No matter how big, right? Dell was a startup. And Techstars was a startup. And, the origin story of Techstars was David and I had been co-founders on a number of different businesses. We'd met in 1991. So, almost over 30 years ago now, and created a bunch of businesses and had some success and had some failure. And we're trying to figure out a way to pay it forward and help other entrepreneurs, both by giving them some advice, but also by helping them learn how not to hit all the same landmines that we had hit. Something that we had neglected to do in our startup career, right? We had made every mistake in the book, and it took us a while to realize, some of these mistakes are avoidable, and mentorship is great. And so we got together in 2006 was the idea, and David gets credit for having the idea and came up with this idea that maybe we could create a business that was to help to pay it forward, to help other entrepreneurs be successful. We had been angel investors for a while. We had joined an angel group that we weren't too happy with. And a lot of what Techstars was in the beginning was fixing what we saw as broken. And the word accelerator, didn't even exist then. And it was just, It was a 100% experiment. It was summer of 2007. We put up a website. We invented some people we invited people to apply. We had no idea if anybody would actually come. But we said, we'll give you a little funding. We'll surround you with community members to give you advice. We won't charge you, which the angel group did at the time to pitch. In fact, we'll invest in you, and our business model will be, we'll participate in your success only if you're successful. And We'll make it a 3-month program and have an event at the end. We didn't use the word demo day. We didn't say we'd have mentors. We didn't use the word accelerator. All those things had to be invented. Those words had to be invented later. And we thought we'd try it out for 3 months in the summer of 2007. Ironically, as a way to our previous businesses, we traveled the world and had to fly everywhere, and we both had young families, and we want to stay close to home, and we wanted to, do something in Boulder, Colorado, and not have to travel so much. Who knew, right, that it was going to become this, global organization? It certainly wasn't the idea at the beginning. It was a couple of guys doing a startup and trying to figure it out, and not making any salary, and trying to find a bargain basement place to rent out some space, and through smoke and mirrors convince people that we knew what we were doing to come to the accelerator. And we had some early success. We had some early exits come out of that first program, and one thing led to another, and allowed Techstars to grow and expand to 50 different accelerators today.
That's great, and that story is extremely common, and I mean that is just it's a lot of the companies that are around, literally, right, for more than a decade. The companies that have an impact are the ones that usually it's not a bunch of founders, looking at a risk board trying to take over the world. It's one step at a time. It's a grind, just trying to help customers and growing organically, right? And it's so many of the things that you just said is also how Founder Institute has grown, and also just how I've seen so many other of our best portfolio companies grow as well, where it's just you take what's ahead of you, the opportunities present themselves if you help people, right?
And
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 you just go from there.
And I think this applies to all of you listening in, right? I mean, a lot of people say, wow, you had a lot of vision for what this would become. And the honest story is, just what you were saying, Jonathan. We were stumbling around in the dark with blindfold on early on, with our hands out, trying to figure out, if we could find product market fit. And that's exactly what every startup that is successful was doing in the early days. They didn't really know the exact path. They didn't look at a risk board. They didn't have a 100-page business plan.
And trying to figure out, I'll also say, trying to figure out that exact path is such a waste of time, right? It's almost and I imagine you have a book called No Vision, All Drive, what I learned from my first company. So one of the interesting things that I saw as one of the comments about the book is that it's not so much about company building. It was more about like kind of the journey and the relationships, right?
Totally. And startups are about rapidly iterating, trying different things, see what works, do more of what works. If it doesn't work, call it, try something different, doing that every single day, until you find your path, until you find your way.
Yeah. For reference, like at Founder Institute, we hired for our first cohort, which by the way launched about 6 weeks after we incorporated the business. We hired, this was back in 2009, the most expensive video crew, right? Because we thought, oh, we're going to sell like premium videos on YouTube or something, right? And then people just started calling us, say, hey, can we bring Founder Institute to our city? We're like, sure, I guess, right? And then you follow those organic opportunities, solve a problem for a customer. Those opportunities will just start to present themselves, right?
Exactly.
The universe will tell you where to go.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm going to transition here a little bit into just some of the other stuff that Techstars is doing. But I will say, for anybody in the chat, we do want to sprinkle as many of your questions into here as possible. So please don't be shy. Throw them into the chat. We have a team of people from F5 who will be feeding some of these questions to me. So please don't be shy. Okay, so just so we talked about a little bit about how Techstars started, and I want to talk a little bit about where you guys are going. It's something that probably a lot of people have seen, and to be honest, Techstars has been a leader in the space for a very long time. You guys have been running a lot of very impact focused accelerators, but you announced something just I don't know, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, with JP Morgan, to essentially run, and as I said, you run a lot of individual accelerators for impact, but this is something like 40 accelerators you're going to be running, specifically targeted at kind of closing this opportunity gap of entrepreneurs to help them launch their businesses. I'd love to just hear in your words kind of what that opportunity is and how you would describe that to people, and how it's different from how you guys have attacked this in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's much more deliberate and it's much a bigger scale. And so what we did was we partnered with JP Morgan to where they spoke to their clients, their wealthy clients, and said, who's interested in making really great investments in specifically Black and Brown founders in various cities around the United States. And so let's take the model, the Techstars model that already works, cohorts of 10, 3-month program, $120,000 investment, et cetera. And let's provide it to a group of underrepresented and underestimated founders that have really great businesses, and do it in a way that provides a network and access to those that may not otherwise have had the ability or opportunity to do that. And I think it's one of the great things that came out of COVID. You were mentioning it a bit in terms of the Founder Institute conferences such as this one. The same has been true for Techstars in many ways, in that we're able to provide programs to individuals who may not be able to fly to Boulder, Colorado for
Yep.
3 months and spend, quit their jobs and, just work on their business full time. And so I think it's a really, really great initiative. It's been in the works for well over a year. And to see it finally come to fruition is extremely exciting. Because honestly, because of the scale, right? We can do a
Yep.
little here, we can do a little there, but to have JP Morgan and their resources behind the fundraising that it took to make this happen is hopefully just a really great opportunity for Black and Brown founders across the country.
I encourage anybody to check it out. I can't imagine a sales cycle or a partnership cycle with JP Morgan is fast. So yeah, I'm sure it was not an easy thing to pull together, but I encourage anybody to check it out. And just as a side note, so people know, Founder Institute graduates go into all types of accelerators or angels or whatever around the world, and obviously we are in a lot of countries, so there's a lot of local accelerators, right? Techstars is one of the few that are in a lot of cities around the world, and consistently since day one, and this is feedback that I've given since probably 2010. The feedback coming back from our founders that go through Techstars has always been the most positive of other accelerators. So we've always loved what Techstars does, and yeah, the companies that come through our program that then go through yours have always have the best things to say. So
Very
check
kind.
out what they're doing. Yeah, check out what they're doing with JP Morgan, but even additionally, just check out what they're doing everywhere else. So now I want to transition a little bit, all right, and into what I would call venture trends. And it was funny, even just the last couple of days, you start to see some of this news come out, right? I mean, I think in the last day or two, it's been this company Fast, right, laying off a lot of people. The last 18, 24 months, whatever you want to quantify it, has been somewhat ironically, one of the frothiest periods for startups. I mean, what are the biggest macro shifts that you are seeing now, and kind of where do you think the market is going, just for venture capital and startups in general in the short term?
Well, look, let me start by saying, because I know the audience is early stage startups, and that is 100% my sweet spot. There's
Mhm.
nothing to worry about, right? Really great companies and really great entrepreneurs will always do well. And so while the macro trends might be there's a bit of a contraction and maybe there's a little less capital available, or maybe, valuations will have been a bit too frothy and will come down. That doesn't mean that it's a bad time to create a startup. I think it's the other way around. Look, my most recent startup, Techstars, we started in 2007, right before the financial crisis. It was
We started 2009, by the way.
yeah,
Yeah.
you started in the middle of it, right? And here we are. It is a great opportunity sometimes when times are tough to get things right and be ahead of the pack and be the company that investors want to invest in because you're simply out executing everybody else. The flip side of that, and you mentioned fast is a good example. We shouldn't expect, right, that you can lose money hand over fist and that, investors will always be there and ready to, pour in another $1 billion or billion valuation, whatever they were looking for, and then cut that in half. And then still nobody was interested. I don't have any inside baseball other than what I read on Fast, but, I think it might be a little bit presumptuous to lose that much money and expect that investors will just always be there to bail you out. And I wouldn't recommend doing that, no matter how frothy valuations are or how much capital is available in the market. It's just not a smart way to run your business.
Right.
So, look, macro trends don't appear to be heading towards higher valuations and more capital available. But my advice is heads down, execute, run a great business. You guys are smart, you're inventive, you're hardworking, you'll do great.
No, and I love this too, right? Because let's dive into that a little bit. The stuff that gets press, right, is in the later stage market, right? The big money.
Yeah.
That's what's going to get the press. And there's going to be so many of these stories coming out, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. And a lot of it is things that could have been foreseen last year, right? When a company raises money at a certain valuation, they raise this much money. And again, we're not talking about companies pre-seed and seed, right? Companies at the larger end of the spectrum, they are going to be raising money at massive valuations, and those massive valuations come with massive expectations. And those massive expectations mean that they have to spend a ton of money to reach the growth metrics that they are promising to their investors. So it looks like David cut out here, but I can continue to talk about this. Just we're at a point in the market where there is going to be a lot of news about startup failures. Okay. And a lot of these startup failures are ones that are not necessarily, number one, is to Dave, what David was saying is that they're not necessarily going to impact the lower end of the market, and that is the seed and pre-seed founders. But number two, it is just it's kind of the nature of the game, right? When you're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, there are going to be people that over speculate and do these kinds of things, and that over speculation will lead to massive amount of burn, which will lead to some of the startup failures that we'll see coming along the pipe. Hey, David.
Hey, so sorry about that. Bad time for
No
my
worries.
computer to decide to crap out.
Yeah, so I was just talking about how a lot of the valuations and rounds that were raised last year, right, create these expectations for enormous growth.
Nice.
And the press is always going to talk about the big money, right? But for the founders, and there's a lot of angel investors on this conference as well, who are focused, like Founder Institute, on the pre-seed and very early stages, right? For them, we're a little bit insulated from this stuff because, yeah, like you said, it's times of change, times of disruption, if you want to call it, right? Is when uh, entrepreneurs that just execute quickly, cheaply, efficiently are the ones that can kind of come to the top, right?
Couldn't agree more. And, I would say like it's always interesting to read the news, but you're right? The news is about the outliers.
Yep.
And the big crashes or the sensational stories or the huge valuations. And none of us should, as early stage founders, none of us should be overly influenced by big investors pushing us to go in a direction or even small investors, right? Pushing us to go in a direction that doesn't feel comfortable. In the end, it's your business, and you owe it to your investors to be honest with them in the direction that you want to take it, and then go execute in that direction. If they're putting pressure on you to, spend like crazy and doesn't feel right to you, I give you permission to push back, because I think the odds of your success are much higher if you do.
Yeah. So I know you've talked a lot about like the concept of humility for entrepreneurs, right? And I actually think this is like super prescient now, because a lot of entrepreneurs were raising rounds at crazy valuations. And again, this is at the top level of the market, but this is what people are going to be reading about in the media. Like how can an entrepreneur who is, either going to their first round of funding or their second round of funding, or how do you think they can practice humility in a way that is going to help them build something sustainable as a business?
Yeah, I've talked about this a number of times. In fact, I think there's an online talk that I gave in Montreal at Startup Fest that's gotten a bunch of views, about sort of the importance of balancing self-confidence, right? As entrepreneurs, we need self-confidence. If you don't have self-confidence, you can't get the funding and you can't inspire people to follow you. But at the same time, not be arrogant, right? That if you're arrogant, it rarely works as a CEO. I mean, I never knew Steve Jobs, but by all accounts, right, he certainly had a bit of that in him and pushed people really hard. And there was a cult of Steve and everybody followed him anyway, but that approach rarely works. So if you can balance being self-confident without being arrogant, that equals humility, right? That equals the right formula, I believe, to be able to sort of have a vision, inspire people to, charge the hill with you, without it being a jerk about it. And you'll attract better employees. You'll have more fun. You'll sleep better at night. Your significant other will stay with you. All kinds of good things happen when you figure out that balance. But it's not easy. And, I have a longer story than we have time for here on how I learned that. It took me until my 30s until I really sort of internally figured out how to get that balance right for me.
But part of what you just said too, it's less about it's a lot about the progress, right? It's a lot about it's not exactly. I mean, I think a lot of that internal confidence but not being a prick about it,
Yeah.
right? Can come from like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not, at this level right now, but I came from this level to this level in the last month, right? And we're guiding people through this journey. So I know you've also talked a little bit about just how, it's not about what metric you are now, right? Especially when we're talking about early stage companies, it's just about the progress that you're making over time, whether it's a month to month period, quarter to quarter, year over year, right? And I've always used that as very inspirational message to people, because it's not, look, I don't care if you might have 10 customers now, right? But if you have 30 next month, that's huge, right? So, I mean,
That's exactly right. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
So yeah. What advice would you have to founders just to, again, there's so much press and so much noise about people doing this. Oh, you should be raising $1 billion. You should be doing this, right? So many of the people that are on this conference today are either investors in companies that are just getting started, or they are founders in companies that are just getting started. And their metrics are going to be so low, right? But I know you've talked a lot about just like, it's not about the metric, it's about the growth, right? So what pieces of advice would you give to them? Maybe some of them that you had to learn the hard way as well, right?
So in Techstars, we have 6 criteria to get in. It's sort of almost a half joke, right? Because it's team, market progress idea. And usually when I tell that story, it's because the point I'm making is that team matters so much that it takes the first 3 slots. But let me just talk briefly about the 5th point, because that's what you're getting at. It used to be team, market traction idea, but we changed it very early on to be team, market progress idea. And what does that mean, right? If you have 100 paying customers, that sounds like traction, right? But if you've been at it for 10 years and they're each paying you $10 a year, that's not so great, right? So progress. Conversely, let me give a different example. Let's say you have a sort of rudimentary website and a barely functioning prototype. Of those 2 companies, right, the one that has 100 paying customers or the one that has the rudimentary prototype, on the face of it, you'd say the first one is a better investment. But what it's not taking into account when you look at traction, which is a moment in time, what it's not taking into account is progress, which is how long did it take you to get there? So the company that has the 100 paying customers that's taken 10 years to get there versus the second company that has a rudimentary website and a half-working prototype that only started a month ago, like I would invest in that second one all day long, right? And so it's really not about where you are. It's where you are compared to where you are a month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, right? That is progress. And so when we accept companies into Techstars, we're looking for progress, right? It's not that you need $1 million in revenue. It's not that you need a certain number of paying customers. It's, did you get shit done in the last few months, right? Or are you just sitting around saying you want to do something, but you're not actually doing it? So it's really a measure of ability to execute.
Right. And that's great because that term traction, right? It creates so much friction, I feel like, because it's always a different thing. But it's just progress it doesn't forget about traction, right? It's whatever you are.
I got something done, whatever it is, right? I found a co-founder. Awesome. You got something done. Traction matters more at the later stages. When you're at Series A and certainly Series B, and you haven't been able to identify some metrics and hit them, then yes, like you're going to struggle. You're not quite ready for that stage yet. Traction matters. But in the early stage, it's much more about progress.
So many more variables at that stage, less data. So it's just, what did you get done? Yeah. How are you able to push the business forward? We like to call it FSO people at FI, figure shit out people.
Figure shit out.
Yeah,
it's GST. Right? Get shit done. Same thing.
There you go. All right, so we have a couple minutes left here. I do want to sprinkle in some questions from the audience. So this might be a tough question for you, David. So I just want to line that up. Okay. Jaron is asking, and I hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Who is your greatest example of humility? So I guess I could paraphrase that and say, of the many founders that you've worked with over the years, is there one that you think, displayed that and in such a way where, that it really helped lead to their success or something that you stood out?
Look, I always hate saying the most, the best, whatever, they're
one example.
3,000 companies have been through Techstars. I love them all. But I'll give you one that definitely jumps to mind, and that's Isaac Saldana from SendGrid. Isaac was the founding CEO. SendGrid, as you may know, went through Techstars early on. Became the first accelerator graduate of any accelerator ever to IPO. And then
we are a customer, by the way.
You're a customer, yeah. Who isn't, right? I mean, they process 50% of the world's emails, and ultimately sold to Twilio for I think $3 billion. Right, incredible success story. But Isaac and his co-founders, when they came in and they wanted to join Techstars, it was just the 3 of them. all they wanted to do was solve a problem. They were engineers that they saw in the world, which was, there was no good solution for when I click on forgot password, it always goes to spam. And every company they worked at as engineers, they were working with the email protocols, can spam, whatever it was, to prevent that from happening. And they said, it's really, really annoying as a customer if my forgot password or whatever email goes into spam. And it's really annoying as a developer to have to constantly update this in every application that exists. We'll just do it for everybody. They wanted to solve the problem. And humility, like growing a big business, making a lot of money, charging customers a lot of money. These were not concepts that, I might even say that they even understood, right? They were just on earth, clearly on earth to solve this email problem. And, you asked about humility. Humility became, they had like 4 H's as their core value, honest, humble, and a couple of other H's, right? But humility actually made it into their core values, and they lived it every single day. And I think it's such a great story because they were just delightful human beings, and that you can run a company that way and be that successful, I think is an inspiration.
It is a great story, and it's a great service too, I will say. And I think, again, it's just focusing on solving a problem for a customer and letting the other things
fall
come
into
to you
place.
naturally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I do have a last question here for you. All right. And this is the last question that I like to ask all the speakers that come onto our events. And it's a question that we ask all the mentors at the Founder Institute as well, because a lot of what we do is trying to share knowledge from one kind of generation of entrepreneurs to the next, right? Unfortunately, one of the best ways to, and one of the only ways to learn things are the hard way, right? But I'm sure there are a lot of lessons you've learned the hard way. What is one of those lessons that you learned the hard way that you find yourself sharing the most often with the new entrepreneurs that you work with? That honestly, just because of human nature, maybe they won't listen to, but you wish that they would.
I can't decide, so I'm going to squeeze in 2.
Mhm.
One is make sure that you love what you're doing, right? If you're just doing it because you think you can make a lot of money, but you don't really care about your product or about your service, it's really, really hard when all startups have ups and downs. And in those down days, it's so much easier to get out of bed in the morning and solve the problem that you have if you say, I can't fail at this because the world really needs what I do. And it doesn't have to be, solving global peace or solving climate change. It can be about keeping email out of spam. But when you're passionate about it, it's so much easier to overcome those inevitable lulls. That's thing 1. Thing 2 is it took me a long time to really understand the value of a really strong network. Now, all of you are part of Founder Institute. All of you are participating in this community, so you probably have that figured out much better than I ever did. But my first startup, I was heads down in my business, and I was trying to figure stuff out. And it's not necessarily arrogance that I thought that I had all the answers, but I just felt like I didn't have time to go to stuff, right? Like I had too much work to do. And it wasn't until I had a network that I realized, oh my God, there's so much value in having a trusted resource that I can just pick up the phone or have a Zoom or have a cup of coffee and say, I got this problem, I need help. And so building up that network takes time, and it's done one person at a time. And just making sure that you invest a little bit of time each week in figuring out who your next mentor is going to be or your next mentee is going to be, so that week by week, year by year, you continue to grow that network and have people to help you and have your back is just more valuable than I can describe.
Awesome. For everybody here, I recommend write that down. These are amazing insights. David was starting companies back then when we didn't have a lot of the benefits that we do now. These communities, and startup community wasn't a term back then,
That's
right?
right.
But all right, well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. This was amazing. For everybody else on here, check out his book, No Vision, All Drive. David Brown, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.